This is Rebecca Jernigan, your tour guide into discoveries, coming to you live from the heart of America to around the globe via the World Wide Web, satellite, and podcast. Let's journey together into the realms of the known to the unknown in search of enlightenment, knowledge, and truth.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on this beautiful planet Earth. This is your host, Tobias B. Harrell, and you're listening to Journeys with Rebecca right here on wolfspiritradio.com and being simulcast every week on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com Studio B. Some of the usual program reminders for you tonight. We look forward to taking some of your questions later in the show. Please remember to put them in all capital letters in the chat room so that they are easier to see, and we do our best to answer some of them as time permits in the second hour tonight. I would also like to remind you that both Revolution Radio and Wolf Spirit Radio are listener supported, and I really urge you to give them a donation, big or small. It all matters to ensure that you get the best of continued programming. As always, I'd like to thank our producer and talent extraordinaire, JP, for making sure we can be here tonight. Hello, good evening, and thank you, JP.
Hey, Tobias, it's great to be back on Revolution Radio. See, I had a show at this time, for several years, and now I produce it, and it's so much, I love it so much better. Not having to come up with words every week, you know?
Yeah, it's a lot, isn't it? It takes a great effort and a dedication, and I've been there through many of the years with you, with a number of different radio shows. I've been your guest, I've been your friend, and it is just always a pleasure, as I said, to have you in the background, and I really appreciate that, JP. Thanks again.
Always good fun to
Tonight, my guest, I'm going to get right to it. My guest is an extraordinary man on so many levels. From passion, creativity, and personal drive to music, writing, and truly living life without allowing limitations to overcome him. John David Mann is an award-winning author whose writings have earned several awards, including Taiwan's Golden Book Award for Innovation and the 2017 Living Now Book Awards Evergreen Medal for contribution to positive global change. His books are published in more than 24 languages and have sold more than 2 million copies. He is co-author of the international bestseller, The Go-Giver, the New York Times bestsellers, The Red Circle, and Flash Foresight, as well as several other national bestsellers, including Take the Lead with co-author Betsy Myers, which was, by the way, named Best Leadership Book of 2011 by the Washington Post's Tom Peters. John also contributes to the Huffington Post, where I recently had the pleasure of reading his short story titled The Whispering World. It is just one of several touching tales that exemplify the depth of insight and experience that surround his own life. In October, John's latest book, The Recipe, was released, co-written with chef Charles Carroll. The Recipe is a story of love, loss, and the ingredients of greatness. There are so many things to talk about tonight, so it is my pleasure to welcome John David Mann. Good evening, John.
Good evening, Tobias. How are you? Great to be here.
Oh, it's really good to have you, and I'm doing just fine, thank you. It's just such a pleasure. There's so many things to talk about tonight. I've been going through many of your accomplishments and your World Wide Web presence through your books and websites and blogs recently, and it's just I'm very excited. There's a lot to talk about. I'll put it that way. So, John, you know, clearly you have a very creative and passion-driven life. Was it always that way for you?
Yes, it was always that way for me. Exactly what form that would take or you know, what I would do with that was was often an open question. So it's been a long and twisting path. But yes, I've always been pretty excited about whatever is coming up next.
So you've learned to go with the flow very well, I assume.
Well, yeah, ultimately, I'm not sure I started out very, very adept at that. I think I fought the flow plenty in my time, but yeah, it's I have changed horses quite a few times in my career, and so you have to develop a sense of humor as you go through life, and learn that the saying that if you want to make God laugh, you make a plan. I have been, I think, the source of divine mirth for decades. So, what can I say?
Yeah. I love that. I love that one. That's absolutely true. It is a big joke when we try to plan and, just assume things will fall into place the way we expect them to. So, I mean, you said it wasn't always that way, basically. Who supported you along the way, and who did you look up to?
Honestly, I looked up to my dad, my parents both. They were my first models, my first heroes, really. And I've had writing teachers and business teachers and just friends and colleagues all along the way, and writers I've admired and thinkers I've admired. But I owe a lot to my folks.
I think it's always important, no matter who we are, to have that foundation, because if we have that foundation, we have that sort of, it gives us a certain freedom to express ourselves, and certainly clearly that you've expressed yourself over the years and the decades in so many different ways. Why don't you start painting us a bit of a picture, John, about your life and how it developed, and some of the stories and some of the experiences that you began having as, early on in your life, your career, your experiences that sort of lead into, as we go through the next couple of hours, into finding out who John David Mann really is.
Sure. I was always a happy kid. My father described me as there's some German word, he was German, and there was some German word, Stehaufmann or something, which describes this, toy that when you knock it down, it just bounces back up again. That's how he always described me. But the subtitle of the book, it could be a title of a movie about my life, a story of loss, love, and the ingredients of greatness. Because loss has kind of been a benchmark, a milestone for me. And what I mean is, there have been, my life's gone along in many ways a blessed life, in many ways a happy life, but I've bumped into these places where something terrible happened, or I lost something, terrible, that have really, I think been, if I were a tree and you cut it and you looked at the circles, they would be the big circles, the circles where there were fires or famines or whatever. And they've been, I think, some of the most formative influences in my life. So I'll just give a quick sketch here. I started out as a musician. My dad was a choral conductor and musicologist, so I grew up in a household of Bach and Handel, and I played the cello. I was a composer. I was treading the path of the classical musician. And then at some point I kind of shifted gears and got very interested in health and nutrition and whole foods and wellness and all of that, and spent many years involved in that world. And then I got from there interested in the world of business and sales coaching and direct selling and all of that. And sort of from there, I got involved in the world of journalism and writing about business, which led me to editing other people's stuff. Now, parallel with all that, I got married, and I lost a child, and I got divorced, and I got married again, and I got divorced again, and I made a few $1 million, and I lost them, and I got this big, beautiful house, which I then lost. And I started this business, which ended up in bankruptcy court. You're seeing a pattern here. It's two steps forward, one step back. And so, I'm now in my 60s, and when I reached about the age of 50, it really started to feel like the first half century was for practice. And I married a third time. I am deliriously happy. My wife is my best friend on the planet, and I love what I do. I write books, and I figure if it took me half a century to kind of figure out which seat on the bus is my seat, I'm happy to have spent the half century doing that.
Yeah. When I laughed there, it was a nervous laugh at recognizing the patterns there, because it's a lot of stuff to go through. It really is. But, it always fascinates me because, as interesting as our world is, our times, the people that we come in contact and the experiences every day, I do come in touch with a lot of people, and it surprises me, but a lot of people that don't have a lot of the experiences of really deep grief, really, how do I put it, extreme conditions within their living cycle, basically. So when you talk about that, it fascinates me because I relate very strongly to going through very serious situations and how they mold us. How would you explain to other people some of the biggest values? I know you just told us some great information there and explained sort of the flow of your experiences, but what are some of the experiences that really, really molded you into the path that you eventually took and still take today?
That's a great question. And I guess I could answer it in all kinds of ways. But I'll say this. There have been times in my life when I was convinced I was right. Eckhart Tolle says that the obsessive need to be right is an expression of the fear of death. There have been times when I was convinced I was right, where I was involved in one movement or another movement or a particular religious belief or whatever have you. And also there have been, that was sort of an intellectual conviction that I was right. Emotionally, there have been times when I was convinced I was right when I was in a conflict like a divorce or a business conflict where, or I've been sued a few times or found myself in court a few times. Moments where I was locked in this battle where my heels were dug in, and it was my side was the side of justice, and the other side was like, what is wrong with those people? And I think that having emerged from all that rightness and conviction, one thing it's done for me is to make me very, very appreciative of the coexistence of different perspectives. I think when you're writing, if you're writing anything, whether it's nonfiction or it's fiction, or in my case, what I love to write most are these parables, which are sort of a combination of the two because they're teaching books in a sense. A parable is a story that you write in order to teach a set of principles. But if it feels like that, if it just feels like sort of a thinly disguised PowerPoint or lecture, and people feel like they're being lectured to and it's boring and they don't like it, and I wouldn't enjoy writing it. So for me to write a parable like The Go-Giver or The Recipe, it needs to be story first, people first, character first, and it needs to be a story about someone that I get really engaged in and involved with and that I care about. It needs to feel real. It needs to be real. And so when you're writing about the human condition and about real things, you have to have, I think, an appreciation of sort of the nuanced area between my rightness and your wrongness, or my wrongness and your rightness. You have to kind of get over the whole thing of being right and start, dealing in shades of gray.
Yeah. So in other words, is it fair to say that sometimes what's right is that everybody's wrong?
Yeah. Well, sometimes And sometimes what's right doesn't really become right until you sort of earned the right to appreciate it or to get it. Sometimes a principle that looks right in the face of it becomes deeper when you go through an experience where you internalize it and sort of prove it to yourself and learn it. Maybe by trying the opposite or whatever. So a lot of us go through that. We learn things from our parents as 5-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds. Then we go through teenage where we sort of test it all and rebel against it and try to do the opposite, and then end up in our 20s and 30s or 40s, or in my case, 50s or 60s, eventually saying, oh, okay, I think I'm starting to understand how this works now.
Well, you feel free to date your age, John. I'm not going to follow you tonight.
That's not necessary.
But
not necessary whatsoever.
I was actually talking with one of my students this afternoon about something similar. I mean, we were discussing the fact that, we can go through our lives and have experiences with people, friends, loved ones, and in so many cases, people, and I would add to that business people, associates, people we come in contact through commerce, basically, and endeavors like that. And so often, it seems as though people expect that if we're going to have a good relationship with anyone, that anyone must agree to what we say, agree to our belief systems, agree to what's good, what's bad, and have no opinions that really differ. Sort of the conclusion that we were getting to this afternoon was that this is a really big part of my sort of experience in life, and that is that I believe that uniqueness is the color of life. So living within this sort of, this system, I don't know what else to call it, this sort of system that most people sort of exist within, where we're meant somehow to feel like we should all be similar to be right. It makes a lot of sense to me. What would you say about the uniqueness of expression and individuality? Tell me about the value of this through your experiences and your own understanding.
It's funny because I think that, there's this beautiful thing that the writer Joan Didion once said, I write to find out what I think. And I relate to that so strongly. I first read it in a book where Stephen King repeated it in a foreword he was writing to one of his books. I get that because I often don't know, or let's say it this way, I'll be in the middle of writing something, a piece of a book or a blog post or something, and as a sentence kind of scrolls across the screen, I kind of go, I didn't know I thought that. It's that I've had that experience often in speaking or in leading conference calls or from a stage where I'll start saying something, and part of me goes, I never thought that before. It's something that I knew but didn't know that I knew until I found myself telling other people. I think it's one reason people love to teach is because they find out what they know. There's a point in one of my books, The Go-Giver Leader, where a character says, I think that we live to find out who we are. And it's kind of like the Joan Didion statement, but played out in this stage of life. I think that all of us, living your life is very much like writing a story. And whether you are a writer or not, a lot of people who are writers don't write books, but they write emails or they write blog posts or they write notes to each other or whatever. That's all writing too. Or they text. That's writing. But writing or not, living your life is a lot like writing a story. And in my view, if you're an honest writer, you don't know the whole story before you compose it or create it. And a lot of it is surprise to you. I think that's true about life. I think that the thing about being unique, your unique individual, your unique self, and in a way, I guess the recipe is to some extent the story of a young boy trying to find his path after his father's died, and he's broken up and full of grief, and he's angry at the world, and his life is doing nothing but circling the drain. So a lot of the story is him trying to kind of find his way back to what's the purpose of his life, what's he doing here, and the old chef helping him find that in a sensitive and delicate way. I think a lot of the trick or the challenge to that question you asked about your uniqueness is that it's not clear necessarily when you start, and it only becomes clear in the process of interacting with the rest of the world, with other people. I mean, I'm fond of saying, in coaching to people, saying, nobody knows your path better than you. Nobody knows your value and who you really are better than you, except for the rest of the world. Because there are people around you who actually know you in some ways better than you know yourself. And there will be plenty of moments in your life when there will be forces in the universe arrayed around you that have a much better idea for what you need to do next than you do. And yeah, you know your own mind, you know your own heart, nobody knows your path better than you. Yeah, that's true in one sense. But in another sense, it's a dance between you and the universe, between you and the environment, between you and the wise people around you, or even the not so wise people around you. And I think to discover, it's paradoxical, to discover who you are uniquely, you have to, without losing yourself, without giving away your power or losing your confidence or any of that, you have to stay open to the people around you, the forces arrayed in your path. Because sometimes those are circumstances that are opportunities. Sometimes they're barriers or seeming obstacles that actually have, secret seeds of your next opportunity that you have to be open to seeing. And that I think is the dance of uniqueness, is finding your path by going back and forth to going inside to your own inner voice and going outside to what's being whispered to you by the trees around you.
It's fascinating because, some of us might question, is uniqueness defined by the world, or is it defined by our experiences? And from what you're saying, it sounds like it's a little bit of both, but many other things, right?
Yeah, and I think that it's easy for the world to define you in the sense of your job, your socioeconomic status, your, kind of the categories that you find yourself. And I don't mean that defines you. What I mean by the world is that there will be people in your path or situations in your path that you don't expect. Here, I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example from my own life. I like to say Bob Berg is my co-author of The Go-Giver, and this is the book that I'm best known for. As you said in your introduction, sold more than 500,000 copies, 24 languages. It's actually closer to 30 now, and so it's an enormously popular book. It's made my career, really. I like to say that Bob Berg ruined my career, and how that happened was this. It was 2004. I had a plan. One of those things that makes God laugh. And my plan was I was going to be a screenwriter. I was on my way to Hollywood. And Tobias, man, I was so excited about this. I was so plugged in. I was so passionate. I was convinced that this was what I was put here for. I mean, I fell in love with screenwriting. I read every screenplay I could get my hands on. I went to Barnes & Noble, the big bookstore near my house, every 2 days and waited for deliveries of new books, because every new book on screenwriting I bought and I read. So it was my passion. It was my life. And man, that was me. I was studying with a great screenwriting teacher, a man whom I still credit and still recommend, Hal Crosman, brilliant teacher. Studied online with him. And I'd been out there to Hollywood, had some connections, and I was ready to go. I was set. And Bob Berg emailed me and said, hey, I've got this book I want to write, but it's not the kind of book I write. I need you to write it with me. I was like, oh, man. This is like, Bob was a friend. I was like, oh, man, this is like a distraction. I can't do this. I don't have time for this. How do I say no? But it's Bob. And, Bob is a great guy, and I couldn't just say no. So I said, okay, well, let me take a look and think about it. My wife and I went down to Florida and we visited with him, and I spent a day with him and we talked about it, and he showed me his notes. He'd written pages and pages and pages of notes, drafted some scenes and sketches and ideas. And so, I took it home, and I about 6 weeks later, I had a little free time, and I was noodling around with the things we talked about, and I wrote this scene, which is a scene that comes pretty late in the book. It's a speech that a character named Deborah Davenport gives about authenticity, and I based that on my wife. That's a big theme of hers. And I wrote this scene, and as it was coming onto my computer screen, the words were scrolling across the screen, I went, whoa, this is real. This is not just words out of my head. There's something to this beyond what I thought of. It's like, where did this come from? And I sent it off to Bob. I said, this is cool. And Bob flipped out and sent it back to me. And we went back and forth, and six weeks later we had a book. And I never got to Hollywood. And it completely disrupted my life and ruined my career, and it completely made my life and established my career. And I never would have thought of it. You know, Tobias, I recently sat down and made a list of all the greatest things in my life. My wife, the Go-Giver, my agent, various things that have just been pivotal elements that have established the greatest things in my life. And then I totted up a list of how many of those happened as a result of my planning, and the answer was 0. So that's what I mean by... Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to ask you if did that scare you?
No, because, you know, I think planning is actually awesome, despite what I've said. I think having goals is great. I think that having, you know, a lot of teachers talk about the importance of writing out your goals. I agree with that, but only to an extent. And here's how. I agree with that, but with the cautionary note that it's great to write your goals, to have a target, to make a plan, to set your foot in the path, but always hold out in your mind the understanding that the universe may have a better idea. This is why so many great stories, you got a hero on the path to something they desperately, deeply want. And at the end of the story, they don't get that. They get something better that they didn't realize they wanted. I mean, my favorite example is the Indiana Jones movie, the Holy Grail, right? The third Indiana Jones movie. Indy thinks what he wants is the Holy Grail. He wants to go find this artifact, this famous relic. That's his quest. And in the end, he actually gets his hands on it, and he has to let it go. He has to, let it fall down a crevice in an earthquake, never to be seen again. What he gets is his father. He saves his father's life, and he's never been close to his father. What he actually gets is his dad. And that turns out to be better than the Holy Grail. Well, that's what life is like. You think you know what you want, and that's good. You should go after what you want. But just be open to the idea that as you get there, there may be something even better that you could never have planned, you could never have dreamed up, but that the universe dreamed up for you.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's as though goals are really just opening the door, but you still have to walk into the room and experience all of the other things.
Ah, nicely said. Yes. So you said it much quicker than I did.
You said it much more beautifully than I can. But it's really nice. I love the whole comparison to Indiana Jones, because really life is a thriller. I think as long as we can be malleable and open enough to these things, that we can actually not fear it. As I asked you there, were you terrified when you found out you had less control than you may have thought? But we can steer it. We can actually steer it in different ways, even though we may not know the destination in most cases. We can certainly, enjoy it a bit more if we can open up like that. Isn't that interesting?
Well, it is. And that's, back to the book at hand, the recipe, that's kind of a theme of the book. In fact, there's even a moment in the book where the chef, who is the mentor figure, tells the boy, listen, if you want to get somewhere, put your effort into controlling the sail, not the wind. And he says,
Yes.
you understand what I mean by that? And the boy goes, yeah, I think so. And he has no idea what he means. But he starts to get the idea. And of course, in his life, his father's just died. And he feels like his life is being capsized by a hurricane gale that he has no control over whatsoever. He's being blown this way and that, and everything's going wrong, and nothing's under his control. And what the chef is teaching him is first to pay attention to little things. There's these lessons in the kitchen that turn out to be lessons in life. Pay attention to the little things that you can control, to the little acts that you can perfect, to the little things that you can improve, that you can raise the level, and pay attention to your own space. This principle mise en place, which is like a religion to chefs, that you can organize what you can organize, affect what you can affect, control your space, your sphere of influence, what you can control, and do that with integrity and clarity and intention. And bit by bit, the big things will tend to take care of themselves and come into alignment with that.
It's interesting because so many times, we're talking about goals, like goals, if they're the door opening to bigger things and in the rest of your experience, so many people actually get stuck outside that door because, we say, we'll write your goals down and so many people don't even know what those are. Is it fair? What would you say to people that say, I just can't think of what my goals are? Would you suggest they go crazy and dream bigger, or what is it that you would suggest?
Sometimes, and there's usually at least two answers to any question and two pathways out of any dilemma, at least two. But teachers often say, dream big, go for the moon, make it, a quote, big, hairy, audacious goal. This is a very popular phrase. Mm-hmm. That's good, can be good, but it also can be intimidating. And here's another path, and that is, sometimes it helps to go a lot smaller. And I'll give you an example again from my life. I've written about 24 books. Some have been much more popular or successful in terms of numbers of copies in circulation than others, but they've all been successful to some extent. There are 24 good books out there. I feel pretty good about that. Some of them have been New York Times bestsellers. Some of them have been global bestsellers. And that's all, fine and dandy. And here's the truth. When I sit down to start a new book, I get totally intimidated. And I'm not saying this out of false modesty or just to make a good story on a show. When I do my research, I have the conversations with the person I'm writing with. I read their other books or hear their talks, or I do some digging around online, and I kind of gather kind of my background. So I kind of know what we're writing about here. There comes a moment where I have to sit down and start. Mm-hmm. And figure out, okay, now how does this book open? What's the story about? What happens on page 1? And it's totally intimidating for me. It's sometimes terrifying, but at the very least, it's nauseating.
Yeah.
And the reason I know this is I learned a principle many, many years ago, decades ago, actually, in the 1980s. I learned that if I spoke my internal dialogue out loud and actually said what I'm thinking inside, I would be appalled by what I heard, but at least I would start to get a handle on it. So I'll when I'm alone in my office, I'll say things like, John, you have no idea what you're doing. John, you are some kind of idiot. Or, I'll say things that I know I shouldn't be saying, but that's just what I'm thinking. I can't help it. I'll say, John, you total moron. You have no idea what you're doing. And then I'll hear myself and I'll say, okay, let's say that a different way. And I'll actually take myself by the hand and say, John, this project, instead of saying this project is so daunting, I have no idea what I'm doing, I'll say, John, this book is so thrilling. This project is so huge. I don't have any idea how it starts, but I can't wait to find out. And it's going to be fantastic. So I'll actually talk myself through it. But here's the truth. I'll reach a point where I say, I can't write this book. And you know why I say it? Because it's true. I cannot write this book. I'll sit there trying to flip through my notes and kind of get the sense of the whole book in my head. and get an arc of the whole structure of it, and all 10 or 12 chapters or whatever, and and I can hold it in my head. Nobody can, or maybe, I don't know, maybe John Irving can. I can't. What I can do, I've discovered, is I can do what Hemingway said. I can write one sentence. I can start. And so I'll sit in my easy chair, away from my computer, away from everything else, with a blank pad of paper and a pen and a cup of hot tea and headphones in my head. And I'll just say, okay, looking for a sentence or even part of a sentence, and just sort of sit and be quiet. It's like meditation. Get my mind as empty as it wants to get and go, I'm open for business. Anybody got any ideas? Anyone? Bueller? Hello? And after 15 or 20 or 30 minutes, I'll get an idea for a sentence, which is terrible, and I'll play with it and make it a little better. It's sometimes goals are intimidating, and what helps is to make a goal for today or for now or for what's next. That's why I write blog posts. A blog for me is 400, 500, 600 words, and it takes me a couple of days to write it. I go through 3, 4, 5 iterations, and it feels like I've written a book when I'm finished. I get this, like this endorphin rush of having finished the thing. And it's a page, but it feels great.
Well, there's a great deal of energy that goes into anything that's so intensely creative, isn't there?
There is, and there's the great temptation to be self-critical. And this is one of the toughest things, is that, one reason I like writing a sentence at a time is that, you write a sentence, and then you write another, and then you write another, and you just put it there, and you don't worry about whether it's good or bad. You just put it there. If you start to worry about whether it's good or bad, then it's over. Game over. You can't do that. You just have to accomplish it, put it away, and worry about it tomorrow. You can worry about whether it's good or bad, or whether it needs improvement. In any creative act, whether it's writing a book, building a business, or starting a project, or creating a community or an organization or anything, there's a lot of creativity involved, and you have to give yourself the space to brainstorm and throw the ideas out, without squelching them with that editorial voice.
It's fascinating, because what you're talking about right now, writing a book, the process of creativity and sort of the state that you find yourself in at the beginning of a new project like that, is really a parable to life itself and everything else that you've written up, isn't it?
The more I do this, the more that occurs to me, the more it seems to me. In fact, I end up writing a lot of blog posts about the parallels between writing and living. Mm-hmm. One of the things I love about my wife, there are many, we could spend the next 90 minutes talking the list, but one of the things I love about her is that earlier in our relationship, I would find she would ask me a question, and I would want to start to tell her something about how I was feeling about something or something, whatever. And I would struggle because I didn't feel like the words were going to come out right. And she would just encourage me to just kind of say it. And she would let me know that how the words came out was going to be fine. And I believed her. And so I would come out with this statement that might be a paragraph long, or might be 2 or 3 minutes of rambling, that I would think were the ramblings of a madman, that they made no sense. Mm-hmm. And she would listen, and she would go, I get it. That's fantastic. I was like, wow. She listens to me even when I'm not edited. There's no revisions in first draft. And I think, we've all got to have the space where you can just let your first draft be heard, and just yourself the way you are, without improvement.
Yeah, sometimes just to be you is the best thing you can possibly do, isn't it?
The best thing, and it can be at times the most terrifying thing.
Absolutely. It's really interesting to hear your stories about starting to write something new, because it reminds me of doing a radio show. Like, seriously, I mean, yeah. I've never considered myself to be any great famous world star on the radio stage, but just to the creative process, the energy that goes into it, you must have some sort of structure to begin with. And then my favorite thing is getting through that structure at the beginning, as we have done tonight, and then getting into the spirit of the story, the spirit of the words. And there's something, a living energy behind, I know you know this. There's a living conscious energy of some sort of mystical, some sort of magical type that speaks through the words and gives them power. And it seems it's beyond what is just our understanding of ourselves sometimes, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. You know what it's like? It's like I'll sit there with my wife and look at one of our kids and go like, where did that kid come from? And yes, I know part of the DNA came from me. Part of the DNA came from you. But then there's this whole other personality. Where did that come from? That's what this book, The Recipe, is like for me and Chef Charles Carroll. It's like, it came in part from events in his life. It's fiction, but there's a lot of his life that's actually slipped in there. A lot of details and particulars of his life are in the book. And a lot of my life is in there too. A lot of his thoughts, a lot of my thoughts. It's the same with The Go-Giver with me and Bob Berg. I know it came out of my head. I know that I typed the words, but so help me, where did those ideas come from? And sometimes I am just as surprised by what happens in the story as the reader's going to be when they read it.
It's I understand what you're saying. It's a fascinating thing because it's as though, like you said, you used having a child as a comparison, and perhaps it is the same thing because you have, your co-author come into the picture, you have yourself put some part of the story together, and really you really are creating a new entity, a new being, a new child, and that's what gives it life. And so I can totally understand where you're coming from when you say it's like it's hard to believe that even came from you sometimes. It's fascinating.
And I was on this show the other day, and the host said this thing about the chef. He started talking about the chef and her view of what he was going through. And as I was listening, I was saying, I never thought of that. I never saw it that way. And I realized that when the reader reads the book, it becomes yet still something more and different and unique because, you as the reader bring your own experiences to it. And that, so if 100,000 copies go out, there's 100,000 versions of what I think is our story.
Yeah. Yeah. And that cumulatively creates the magic of what the life of that story. And I think it goes beyond, even what we probably understand at this point. It's a fascinating thing. It can do great things because it creates not just a life of its own with the story, but it creates changes and benefit in people's lives all over 100,000, 1 million people, whatever it is. This is the progress that we want to see in our lives, and not just our lives, but the world, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. Where have you, I'm sure you've considered this, and I probably have some sort of idea of how you may answer it. I'm just being a little bit intuitive here. But where do you think the creativity comes from?
I think for me, there are two answers from that. There's sort of the inside answer and the outside answer. Inside wise, it's almost like metabolism. It's like where do your blood cells come from? It's like you're metabolizing experiences, thoughts, other people's ideas. You're taking this all in and you metabolize it, and it starts to create new organic compounds of thought and structure and story and character. So there's that whole metabolic process going on that is so mysterious, and it's internally each person. And then there's also the external question, and not to get too esoteric about it, but there are people at the forefront of quantum science that are suggesting that that there's, if you probe down below the layer of electrons and below the layer of subatomic particles and below and into deeper and deeper and deeper levels of matter, you get into what appears to be sort of pure organized information. And it's like that there's this mystical idea that the universe is this gigantic weave of consciousness, information, that there appears to be a sort of a scientific version of that has some validity. So that gets pretty esoteric and pretty wild. But you gotta think and you can course, approach that from a very traditional religious standpoint too, that there is God and and the consciousness that is universal is, much bigger than you or I will ever be as our individual selves. However you approach the idea, whether from a cosmic standpoint or a scientific standpoint or a religious standpoint, there is this pretty common human idea that there's a lot of consciousness out there that can be tapped in some way. And however that might be true, and whatever the best description of that might be, you sure do get the experience of that when you're coming up with the idea for a radio show, or coming up with the idea for a business, or coming up with the idea when Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak came up with Apple Computer. I mean, it's like, yeah, there are things in both their experience you can point to that you say formed that, but there was something else going on. And that's the way it is with these things. There's Charles's experience as a world-class chef, and there's my experience as a person and as a writer, but some of this stuff came from some other place that I'm just grateful it's there.
Absolutely. I can totally relate to that as well, John. It's fascinating because when you're talking about starting your process and sort of going from 0 to 100 in its own motion, you start with one sentence and then you build upon that. I can understand what you're saying there for sure through my own experiences. And yet it seems to me that so often what happens is, even if I have one idea, one concept, one sentence, one part of the puzzle, once I get some real deep inner understanding about the bigger picture of what I'm looking at, that's when the life of the story comes to seep into it. It comes to seep into it. So for example, even today, getting to know you, looking through your work, before I looked at your work, I didn't know who you are. I didn't know what you were about. I had some small idea, but then I look at the bigger picture, get more pieces of it, and it starts to become a life of its own. And once people get that understanding, then it has real power, I think. It's really fascinating. And the things that you've done are so vast. The stories that you've talked about, the creativity that comes through is multi-topicked, so to speak. There's so many parts to it. It really engenders your whole life, doesn't it?
It does, and it's I was impressed. I heard your introduction. You went out in the Huffington Post and you did some digging. That's fantastic. Here's an example of that is it's easy for these, and I think I may have said this already, for these parables to be kind of flat and two-dimensional or one-dimensional. And that's why parables in some circles have a bad reputation. I've heard many business people say, I don't read parables. They're boring and they're pedantic and they talk down to the, well, that can be true. If your parable is really nothing but a thinly disguised PowerPoint presentation that you just wrote to make a point, and you just slap the name of a few people on it, like you call this one Bob and that one Mary, and say, well, Mary, what do you think? Well, Bob, here's what I think. And it's like, okay, that's really boring. For me, what happens is that when the character starts to come to life, and I'll give you an example in this book, The Recipe. I knew it was about this boy Owen, and that his father just died, and I sympathized with that, and I empathized, and I kind of fell in love with this kid. And there was this crusty old chef who was kind of like Mr. Miyagi in Karate Kid, right? Mysterious and inscrutable, and making him just cut the vegetables, wax on, wax off. As the book was unfolding, as we were writing the book, I started to get to know this chef character a little better. And without spoiling anything, there are some twists and turns in the story. And there's more to the chef than meets the eye. There's some backstory, and there's some vulnerability there. And the chef also has something to learn in the course of the story. And he's not perfect, and he's not all wise and all seeing and all powerful like Oz. And Oz turned out to be kind of vulnerable too, didn't he? So, as these characters start to come to life and have some depth and be real characters with flaws and vulnerabilities and feelings and yearning, I get excited about it. I get passionate about it. Now it's not about an idea. Now it's not about.
Whoops, it sounds like we just lost you there, John. JP, can you still hear John?
No, we seem to have lost him in the studio.
Okay, well, let's see what happens. Hopefully, Hopefully it's as easy as unmuting a mic, but I doubt that. It just went click. We'll see what happens with that. Do you still have him on the
Yeah,
feed
I've
there?
got to hold on while we try to get the call back. So
Thank you,
Skype
JP.
is gradually sauntering around. Oh, there
Here we are.
go. John, are you back with us?
I am back.
Fabulous. On you go.
Perfect. Thank you, John. We just lost you for like a few seconds.
I saw this.
Yeah, you saw it happen. Good, because then you probably remember where you were at better than I do. Please continue if you can.
I'm not sure exactly where my voice went, but I know that what I was saying was that it's that the point where the characters start to become real. And you know, I've been an entrepreneur. When the characters become real, that's when you sort of that feeling of passion that you're talking about, that sense of creativity and of real motion and momentum sort of kicks in. You know, it's like that with being an entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur, and you may start out a business idea with, you think it's going to be this, you think you're going to be serving this or making this widget. And then as you start to interact with real customers and real people, your marketplace, you start to find that they respond, that, you know, a demographic you didn't expect. You thought you were making this for 20 somethings, and you find that, you know, 60 somethings are responding, or whatever it is. You get response from the marketplace, and you have to change your plan, because now it's real. It's not just your construct, your idea, but it's a living, breathing entity. To me, that is one of the most important things an entrepreneur can do, is to not build their business out of budget and concept, but out of real interaction with a test market, with a customer group. You know, one of the first things we did with the recipe before we published the book was I gave a pre-press edition out to a circle of over 100 people. And I got a whole sphere of people reading it and talking back to me about it. And I changed some stuff in the book as a result. It became a living, breathing thing. I think that's so important.
Oh, yes, I can understand that. It's interesting because sometimes I talk about what I refer to as the synthetic world. And what I'm referring to when I say that is basically the things that are presented in front of us for our experience that aren't things that we actually think through ourselves. Sometimes that happens through education, sometimes through media, sometimes through all sorts of different places. But when you're talking about creating a new business, it really parlays into the same idea for me, because if you're not doing it truly connected to the people you're trying to appeal to, if you're not really doing it out of the passion and creativity that brings it alive, then you're going to possibly and probably miss some of the success with it, because it needs to be not synthetic. It needs to be from you. It needs to be who you are, and it needs to be alive and constantly flowing, as you indicated.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such an interesting dance, the back and forth between being true to yourself, listening to your own voice, and interacting with the other, with the outside. I mean, I'll give you an quick example in this book. From the very early draft, I had a few readers who said, I wish I knew more about the mom. It's like there's not much of the mom here. And I realized that they were right. And as a result, I rewrote the mom. I mean, I wanted to learn more about her. I realized the reason I hadn't written much about her was that I had no idea who she was. She was a zero to me. She was a cipher. It's just that Owen had a mom, period. It could have been anybody. And so my readers were absolutely right. We needed to know. And then another reader said, we never actually see his dad, and I'd kind of like to know what he was like. And I thought, oh my gosh, they're right. To me, it was just a dead father, right? It was like a Shakespearean character. Mm-hmm. He's been stabbed, he's off the stage. Mm-hmm. And so I wrote a scene that has come to be, a lot of readers, and my favorite scene in the book is the scene with Owen and his dad, this memory that he had, which is what inspires the drawing on the cover of the book. Came out of that scene that wasn't in the first draft. It came out of my readers.
Yes. And that's another part of it. I mean, that's where does it come from? I mean, for you, and I know these things come from different places, different, dimensions almost, I'm sure, some types of dimensions. But for you, what's the balance between, I'm going to pick it up on the other side of the break. That music came so very fast. We're talking with John David Mann, and it's been a pleasure. We will pick it up after the break. Talk with you all shortly.
Hello, this is Maggie Rose McGrath of The Concord Show.
And co-host Marine Corps Matt, coming to you on Monday and Tuesdays in Studio A, noon to 2 Eastern.
And Studio B on Wednesday nights, 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. Eastern, with educational, instructional, information, and situational updates, often with wonderful guests on the current landscape in the U.S. and overseas.
This is a go.
We are with you, side to side, and back to back.
Please join us on Monday through Wednesdays,
as well as other hosts and guests here on Revolution Radio.
We're not gonna take it anymore. That's right, we're not gonna take it anymore. We said we're not gonna take it anymore. That's right, we're not gonna take it anymore.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Welcome back to Journeys with Rebecca. I am your host, Tobias B. Harrell. Just a reminder to you that while Rebecca is away, she looks forward to connecting with you still through her personal sessions. And while the classes that she had scheduled have been postponed temporarily, she welcomes you to book your sessions with her as they are available. And as always, I look forward to meeting you through many of the things I offer through my sessions and courses. You can find me at etlanguages.com. where I welcome you to take a look at my course, Practical Modern Magic, which is now enrolling for the upcoming fall-winter course season. Be sure also to take a look at the other resources pertaining to connecting the conscious and subconscious minds while you are there. And of course, Rebecca can be reached through her website, journeyswithrebecca.com. Tonight, I have been talking with John David Mann, New York Times bestselling author and entrepreneur. Welcome back, John.
Thank you. Great to be back.
Great. You know, creativity is I love making these blanket statements because, I know you know what it's all about. Creativity, it's my forum, it's my stage. I have it for 1 minute here and there. Creativity is important because even for people that aren't writers, we're all writing our lives, right?
That's exactly right, and it often doesn't seem that way. It's deceptive because it seems like, you turn the page to a new day, and this is going to be kind of a repeat of the last day, or the same day last week, or the same day last month. And so, because there are a lot of circumstances that suggest that, but it's not. Of course it's not. That's why movies like Groundhog Day, why we love them so much, because they bring home the fact that that's just an appearance. That's just an illusion. It's a deception of circumstance. Yeah, every day is a new day. Every day is literally a brand new universe. And yes, you bring some things with you from yesterday, but it's really easy to live by assumption. Because it was this way in the past, it's going to be this way now. Well, it's not, Sometimes it's catastrophic events that bring that truth home. Suddenly you think everything is normal and there's a shooting, or there's an earthquake, or lightning strikes your house, or, your stove blows up, or your bank account gets hit by the IRS, whatever. But, it doesn't have to be catastrophic events. It can also be catastrophically good events. It can also just be changes, different things. The truth is, life is new and different every single day, and you have to become aware of that if you're creating anything, whether it's a book or a song or a dance or a business or a radio show, as you said.
Yeah, it's interesting because some of my teachings talk about how on the quantum level, as you just inferred, that things are constantly changing. And I kind of find it humorous when I think about myself, because so many times I've said to people that are in a predicament or in a situation where they're terrified at what's going to happen or what won't happen, They're terrified that things won't work out. And the one thing that I find myself saying to people in that situation quite often is, you know what? It's going to work out, and I'll tell you why. Because it always has.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, in this ocean of things that are constantly changing, if we can look back and realize, you know, we've survived this far. We survived this far. We've always, you know, we've always had food to feed ourselves and, you know, roof over our head type of thing. Sometimes we just need that consoling in a way. Sometimes we have to remind ourselves, and it reminds me of you speaking to yourself before starting a project.
Yes.
Not just speaking to yourself, but then also playing the devil's advocate, so to speak, and saying, no, you know what? This is going to be great. I got this because I've done this before and it worked out fantastic.
Yeah. 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 The interviewer, again, to go back to Eckhart Tolle, the interviewer asks Eckhart Tolle, how can we know if the situation we're in right now is the right situation for us? And he says, well, we can know that it is because it's the one that's here.
So, yes.
Right. I get
well,
that.
Yes.
I get that principle. You know, there is I've written a bunch of books with a former Navy SEAL sniper, Brandon Webb. And Brandon and I have become very, very good friends because our backgrounds are so similar. Actually, I just lied. That's not true at all. Our backgrounds are not remotely similar. I have never been in the military. I have never been a sniper. He has never played the cello. But we really connect on certain levels. We like each other. We connect on certain levels of values. His life is interesting. He was in one of the first platoons in Afghanistan right after 9/11. So he was one of the first boots on the ground at that time in Afghanistan for a long tour, and has a really interesting life story in the military. And then he got out of the military and became an entrepreneur and has built a huge media business. But while he was in the military, he was tapped after Afghanistan to revamp the sniper program for the Navy SEALs. And the Navy SEAL sniper program is arguably the most difficult course of training in the world. It's certainly one of them. It's notoriously difficult. And it's not like BUDS difficult, Marine Corps boot camp difficult. It's not that it's physically brutal. It's mentally brutal. The concentration that's required in the course, the mental focus, it's extremely difficult. And his job, he and his training partner, Eric Davis, was to revamp the course and kind of bring it into the 21st century. And so he was responsible for a new course that trained a whole generation of snipers. Interestingly, I've written several books about snipers, and what snipers mainly do is not shoot. In fact, shooting the rifle, they may do 1% of the time or less. It's the least part of their role. They may never even take a shot. It's not what they are. First and foremost is an intelligence asset. They are deployed primarily to observe and to do reconnaissance. So they are trained to be certainly expert shots with a gun, but any marksman is that. Far more than that, they're trained to be expert observers. And one of the things so they revamped this course, and Brandon said of all the changes they brought to the course, the one that he considers most significant is he brought a brand new module in mental management to the program. And central to the mental management program was self-talk. I heard that and I was like, oh man, we are from the same world, brother from a different mother. Because, self-talk is not some airy-fairy woo-woo, vague, self-development concept. This is Navy SEAL snipers. It doesn't get more real than that. Quote, real. So this thing you were describing that I do, where I take myself by the hand and talk to myself, I don't know if there's anything more important, than to me, the most signal adult trait, the thing that most distinguishes a mature adult for me is someone who has the capacity to self-observe and say, I'm not sure I was right about that. And I think I may need to change my mind. In fact, I need to think that differently, and then take themselves by the hand and think it differently. I wasn't kidding when I said, I started out my life with, lots of examples of where I was very involved in being right. It's easy to be right every 3-year-old is right. Every 2-year-old is right. But developing the capacity to self-observe and change your mind and say, maybe I meant well and I was right in a way, but I need to change that. And I'm changing it right now. There, I just changed it. That to me, if you can do that, you are on your way to success.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. We have to be malleable. And, I mean, in a very real way, if we can learn and experience and realize our own self-consciousness, realize that we don't have all the answers, and appreciate the value of being an intelligent asset unto ourselves by listening to others, other experiences, learn lessons, hear stories, it can really create a progress in our lives, a progress towards that success that you so beautifully described there. It's really self-talk is the equivalent of awakened consciousness, conscious to me.
Yeah, it is, because exactly. I mean, you're exactly right, because it's what it implies, what it suggests, and what it really says is if you're self-aware, it means that there's something that's aware of the other thing. If you're aware of yourself, then what's doing the awareness? It's something other than the self, right?
Right.
Because if you have a moon and you have a finger, there has to be a finger pointing at the moon. So yeah, it's the ability to stand outside your thoughts, your convictions, your ideas, and still, have those thoughts, still even, have them strongly, still even have feelings about them and be passionate about them, but to not identify with them, to not be merged with them so that if the thought is threatened, you are threatened. The idea that your viewpoints and opinions can be threatened and you're still okay is the beginning of civil society.
Yes. Yeah.
The screenwriting teacher I mentioned, he said that he teaches a broad array of courses in all kinds of techniques and tools and resources for the screenwriter's trade. A lot of that which I applied to my writing in books. But he teaches this course where he teaches the two fundamental skills. He says you need to have to be a successful A-list writer in Hollywood. Number one, your writing needs to be not good, not even excellent, but just extraordinary. You need to be writing every day and work on it to the level where it is as good as you can possibly be. That is, this is rule number 2 in the chef's 7 rules in the book, The Recipe. Improve every dish you touch. Improve every sentence you write. Improve every piece. Look for ways to make it better, 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 richer, deeper, more true, more real. Just constantly be looking for, how can I raise the level of this so it's even more exciting, more thrilling, more vibrant, more real. But he said the other skill is you have to be nice to work with. And we were all like, wait, that's like a skill? He goes, oh yeah, that is a skill. Because there's so many writers in Hollywood who aren't that. They're pains in the ass. They're obnoxious. They're temperamental. And they get spit out of the system because nobody wants to work with a prima donna. I don't care how talented you are. You can be William Goldman talented. You can be just, the most brilliant writer that ever came along. And if you're a pain in the neck, you're not going to get a job in this town. And that isn't just about getting a job in Hollywood. It's about, it's about getting along in your life. You have to have the capacity to self-correct. To self-improve, to absorb other people's viewpoints and consider them, give them honest consideration, or people aren't going to want to be around you. And if they're not going to want to be around you, then you're in a losing situation.
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, you really do. I can, again, I relate with you on several levels. I mean, if you have to learn to stand outside your programs, so to speak. You have to be able to self-observe your dogmas, the dogmas that you've sort of collected through your experience, your life, and in your education in life. And for anyone that's has difficulty in sort of looking at those things within and around themselves, it's a very, very tough road because, again, it's kind of a stalemate. It's hard to have progress and to expand one's consciousness and make progress. This is my big thing. We need to make progress. We need to make the world a better place. We need to make ourselves better people. And these things that you're talking about are just absolutely fantastic toward that type of subject. I mean, the books that you're talking about with Brandon Webb, I assume, were there's The Making of a Navy SEAL. There's the other book, Among Heroes. Are those both Brandon Webb?
Yes. Our first book was The Red Circle, and that was his memoir. That's really his life story, up to the point where he got out of the military, basically. And that was our first book together. And then Among Heroes is a story of 8 snipers, or 8 SEALs whom he's known, friends, all of whom have died in the course of the last decade and a half. So that was a very wrenching and poignant book to write. And Making of a Navy SEAL is us. And then we just wrote a book called Total Focus, which is a business book, actually, about his business experience and business principles. And there's a book called The Killing School, which is the memoir of four different Spec Ops snipers. And we're working on a book now called Mastering Fear.
Wow. Fear, the blockage to all progress.
It's interesting. You know, no, I was going to say something, but it's off the subject perhaps. So you go ahead with where you wanted to go next.
Oh no, that's fine. I was just going to say fear can be the blockage to progress, but it can also be the impetus to push you in the right direction, right?
Yeah, it is. You know, you can see it as a yellow flashing light can be a light that says, go away, go back, danger, or it can be a light that says, exciting, move forward. You know?
Yeah. Much in a very similar way as to what you were alluding to earlier, when you have circumstances in your life, when you have loss, when you have these extreme circumstances, it's very much the same. What were you going to talk about?
Back to the topic for a moment of improving yourself, because you were talking about this, and it gave me a thought that I was hoping to pick up again, and it's this, this is a tricky one. When I talk about listening to the people in your life, and other people have a better view of you than you do, and so forth. This is actually a little tricky, I think, because it doesn't mean listen to everyone, because there are a lot of people that you really shouldn't listen to. And some of them may be people who love you very much. And so this is where it gets sensitive and a little, it takes discernment. Excuse me. Stephen King, the writer, says this wonderful thing that I always remember, which is when you write your first draft, you do it with the door closed. And when you write your second draft, you do it with the door open. And his meaning is, when you're writing your first draft, whether it's a book or a blog or a poem or anything, and this also could be, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're hatching an idea for a business, hatching a new idea for a business. Think of this as writing your first draft, even though it isn't a piece of writing. Or if you're starting a project, a neighborhood project or a community project or a national, whatever it is. When you're writing your first draft, it's a delicate, sensitive thing. It's like an insect without a shell. It's like a baby whose fontanelle on their skull hasn't closed up yet. It's vulnerable. It's protectionless. And so it's critically important, I think, that you don't show it to anybody, not your husband or wife or best friend or spouse or anybody. And that's me. When I'm writing the first draft of a chapter, I don't even show it to my wife. And she's my best reader, my best critic. But I don't show it to anybody because it's too vulnerable. It's too delicate. It needs to be able to be lousy on the page. It needs to be able to be half hatched and in all of its misshapen and not very good glory. Because it's still in the gestation process, really. Once I've got a draft, I've got a beginning, middle, and end. I've got the idea on paper, enough so that it can stand on its own 2 feet and it exists. Then it's time to start getting critical and go through it again and improve it and look for ways to improve and strip words out and add things in and see what am I missing and see where did I repeat myself. And this is second draft. With the second draft, I'll show it to people. That's the door open. But, and here's where I started this point. The question is, who do you show it to? Mm-hmm. And that's so important because most writers, the tendency is to show it to the people you have access to, right? Your friends. And say, hey man, would you look at this first chapter of a book I'm working on? What do you think? Well, first of all, hey man, what do you think is not the right question to ask. And probably your friends are not the right people to show it to. You really want to show your vulnerable idea to people, A, who have some basis for good judgment, like they know the field. If it's a business idea, then you want to show it to people who have a proven track record of really smart business ideas. Not just to a business professor, or not just to a business person who's, had a string of failed businesses, but to people who have a track record and who have a proven reason to value their view. They have expertise there that you can trust. And second is people you know and trust. And trust only happens over the dimension of time. You have to have known this person over some length of time to have the dimension of trust there. So choose wisely, as the knight in that same indie movie says. Choose wisely who you share your idea with, who you show your draft to, and don't let the world trample on you. Don't let the world trample on your ideas. Or Neil Gaiman, who is one of my favorite writers, says that when a reader says to you, this bit here about this guy here doesn't quite work for me, he's almost always right. When the reader tells you what it is that doesn't work and what you should do to fix it, he's almost always wrong.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you have to learn how to listen to what the world says, whether it's people or whether it's, like, as you and I were speaking of a few minutes ago, circumstances that slap you in the face. Maybe you had a failure and it has something to teach you, but the question, the discernment and the skill is, what does it have to teach you? When we took the Go-Giver to New York, we got 12 rejections. Was the message, this book is no good? Or was the message, you should keep trying because the book is perfect? Or was the message, you need to improve this book? It turned out to be the third message. But, who knew? We took it back 9 months later and we got 12 more rejections. Wow. So now we were up to 24 rejections. You know what? The next one said yes. And here we are 500,000 copies later. The second time the book was ready. Those 12 rejections, they just missed it. So,
yes.
You can't always tell what the world's message is. And that, I think, simply takes practice and discernment and effort and intuition.
Oh, it's a fascinating story. I mean, as you were just talking about, when it comes to deciding who you show your second draft to, you need to kind of know who moves you and which direction they usually move you. And then by the same token, in the reverse kind of psychology, you can't always move every person. So if it has to go through 24 rejections to get to that one that you actually move, that's really all that matters, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. And, we've all heard these famous stories of, Colonel Sanders took his fried chicken recipe to, 5 billion restaurants or whatever. And Mark Victor Hansen and Jack Canfield took their manuscript for Chicken Soup for the Soul to 100 million publishers. And they all said no. And they kept knocking on doors, and eventually someone said yes. So the moral of the stories is always just keep trying, keep knocking, and eventually the right door will open. Well, yeah, sort of. But, it's not that simple. Because sometimes the reason that all the doors are saying no is because your recipe isn't quite ready yet. You actually need to listen to what they're saying, and they're giving you good feedback that you need to change. And sometimes they're just saying no because they're not the right person. Sometimes you just need to keep knocking.
Right. You can't let it knock you down.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I was listening earlier today to you speaking on another show about music and its effect on your life. You said that one example of a piece that you could listen to on a loop would be the end of the Chaconne by Bach. I don't imagine that Bach cared less what other people were thinking, because when he was within his creative process, he seemed very, very likely to be very focused and not externalizing any of it.
Yeah. And here was a man who just so much lived his process. I mean, there was no sense of, I'm working on this piece and at some point it will be published. It was, for him, writing music was like, a modern rock and roll band. They're performing constantly. And then, every now and then they get in the studio and they do what they've been doing for the last year and they just put it on vinyl. I guess there's no vinyl anymore. It was like that. Although, there are different kinds of musicians. I mean, I always think of Mozart and Brahms. Mozart just wrote like he would breathe. It is famously said that Mozart would sometimes, be writing down a piece of music he had in his head, and while he was writing out this piece, he was composing another piece in his head at the same time. He just wrote like you drink water. Then there's Brahms, who would work on a piece and work on it and work on it and work on it for years.
Yeah.
And I am no Mozart. I don't just, breathe music. It takes some time and care for me.
It's fascinating, those three wonderful examples you gave, the different personalities of creativity. Again, it harkens back to what we were discussing earlier about the value in being unique and the value in differences, which is a repeated sort of, is coming up several times in different places in our conversation tonight. And the value of being different, the value of taking different opinions and processing and considering them. Amazing. It's absolutely amazing. Even when I listened to Bach's the Chaconne, and when I listened to it, I literally got the sense of a strong internal movement, which I think is a part of passion and flow, and I got a sense of direction and creative drive. These are very real feelings that I felt as I was listening to the music. So if they can create through their music a power to push and propel us into an emotion or a direction in any given moment, what a power that is. And I think it's fascinating because you yourself, obviously you speak through your music and you move people yourself through your symphonies of words and the books and everything that you write. I think it's just really a really cool phenomenon. I must say that. Such a very powerful benefit to the world.
Well, I've said this before, but probably not tonight. I've had a number of people come back to me who read the book, The Recipe, because they were going to interview me or because they just, were someone who knew me or whatever, and come back and said, dude, I was not expecting this, but you made me cry.
Oh, wow.
I was not planning that, but I went through a box of Kleenex and I hate you. And if I didn't cry while I was writing it, I can promise you would not cry while you're reading it. And if I didn't laugh at points, then if I didn't laugh at my own jokes, you're never going to laugh at them. I do laugh at my own jokes when I'm writing them, because when these words come out of these characters' mouth, I say, "Oh man, what a character!" But yeah, it's I cry when I write this stuff. You have to. Yeah, it has to be. It comes to life. It's got to be real, and that's and when it is, then it comes across that way, and people get that. And I think that all learning takes place best, is transmitted best through stories. I think history has proven that to be true. The best learning happens through stories, and the best stories transmit best when they make you feel something. So emotions may not be the lesson, but emotions are the carrier of the lessons. The story has to move you, and then when you're moved, then your brain gets to digest it and you learn something, and hopefully it's something of value that you can apply in your own life. That's my goal in a book like this. The story will move you, and because that happens, it's like an emotion, it's like a catalyst. The ideas will sink deeper, and they'll get to a place where they show up in your life and have some value for you.
Absolutely. So yeah, I can understand. I mean, people can contemplate things in their mind, but that isn't the feeling. That can take them to the emotion or the feeling, but it's just a part of the step towards it, right? Yeah. And clearly, I mean, I think there's so many, this is part of my passion for my life and my work, is there's so many unseen sort of levels to information, the way we receive it, the way we transmit it, and these unseen sort of things, emotions are recorded within the words even. It's if you don't, like you said there, if you're not feeling something while you're writing it, it's not going to transmit through to the audience.
One of the first things that happens in the book is that the boy cooks a pair of over-easy eggs in the middle of the breakfast rush. The chef says, basically testing him out. He says, "Here, cook this order," and he cooks these. And the boy's thinking like, right, man, I got this with one hand tied behind my back. I know how to cook eggs. And so he is 14-year-old. He's full of confidence at this moment, even though in his life he's a wreck at the moment. So he goes in there and he fires at the pan and he flips it with his hand a few times. He cracks open these eggs, cracks them open one-handed. He is showing off like crazy. And he drops them in the pan, he gets the spatula in there, and he flips them, and he gets them just perfect, and he pops them on the plate with toast and hash browns, and he's kind of glowing with pride, like, hey, I am pretty hot stuff. And the chef doesn't even glance at the plate. He just pushes the plate to the back of the counter and quietly remakes the order and serves his remade version out through the pass to the customer, and then moves on with his next order. And Owen is sitting there doing a slow burn. He's like, what was wrong with my eggs? And the chef takes him aside and says, look, if you're in a rush, then the customer who eats your breakfast is going to be eating a hurried up mess. If you're upset when you cook, he's going to be upset when he eats it. If you're angry when you cook, then it's going to be angry food. And the customer is going to get that. And people, even if they're not consciously aware of it, we're all antennae. We're all tuning forks. We all pick up the vibe. And he says basically, Owen says, you didn't serve my eggs because I was in a bad mood. He says, I didn't serve them because they weren't any good. And he explains, everything you cook reveals everything you are. You can't separate, your mental state, your mood state with what you produce. And that's true of your life. It's true of your family, and it's certainly true of the words you put in the page. That's why I say if I don't cry when I write it, there's no way you're ever going to cry when you, I have a friend, Spencer Johnson, famous author who co-wrote The 1 Minute Manager. And Spencer was on the phone, which has sold 15 million copies or something. Huge author. He was on the phone one day with an author friend of his, an equally famous multi-billion best-selling author. And they were chatting about whatever, and this author, whose name I won't give because I forget at the moment who it was, he said he was in the middle of writing a book that he was on deadline. He had to get, the publisher was expecting this book, and he and Spencer were chatting away. And after a while, he goes, "Spencer, look, I gotta go. I gotta get back to that damn manuscript." Spencer hung up the phone and turned to his wife and said, "That book is going to be a bomb." And here was this author with a record of, just huge success. And sure enough, the book came out and it just didn't sell. And Spencer said, it's because I already knew what was going to be in the book. Not just the words on the page, but what they conveyed. Because I knew how he was feeling writing it. It's like, I got to write this damn book because I'm on a contract. I'm on a deadline. Well, guess what? When people read the book, they may their brains, their left brain, their cerebrum might be picking up the words and the content, but their spinal cord is picking up, I gotta finish the damn book for the contract, for the deadline. They're getting it. Yeah. It all transmits. So, everything you are, everything you cook reveals everything you are. How you do anything is how you do everything.
Wow, absolutely. It's so interesting because, again, we're talking sort of my work, my deal, the things that I work with, talking about conscious and subconscious minds. And sometimes, actually just recently, the thought occurred to me when it comes to being aware of things, even if we're not aware, obviously, there's some part of us that is. And in a very big way, I realized, sometimes you can be kind of in between being awake and asleep, and it seems like everything is just amplified. Your awareness, it's almost as though you can slip back and forth in time, gather information in different ways. Yes. If you can bring it back to your conscious awake mind. Fascinating. And I sort of said to someone, based on that thought, I said, you know what? When we are awake, we are more asleep than when we are asleep, we are more awake.
Mm. Yeah. That's
I just thought beautiful.
That's
fascinating.
It is. And it's so relevant to this because it's like, the conscious mind, the conscious focused intellectual mind is something like the beam of a pen light. And if you imagine being inside a vast chamber of treasures and you're shining this pen light around the room, you can only see a tiny, tiny, tiny little piece at a time. But all the rest is there. And, the scientists say that the amount of information the conscious mind is taking in is about 1/1,000,000th of what the subconscious is simultaneously aware of at all times. But it's not that you don't need that pen light, because you do. It isn't that you don't need that conscious focus. It's that all the other stuff is so vastly important. and that you don't get to it by staring at it, by shining the pen light on it. It's all what's in your peripheral vision. By the way, back to snipers for a moment. Interesting lesson I learned is one sniper told me in sniper school, he said that they spent a lot of time in sniper school learning how to see. And he said, for example, a sniper, the two values that a sniper is concerned with most are motion and color. If you're sweeping a scene, you want to see motion and color more than detail. And he said, because you want to be aware if there's something that's moving out there or something that has a color that doesn't fit in with the landscape. And he said the part of your retina that is acute at perception of movement and color is the peripheral vision, not the foveal or focal vision. So you practice seeing with your peripheral vision. And I think our minds are like that. We have to practice seeing our world with our peripheral vision. And that's why I say it's good to have goals and you focus on goals. But it's your peripheral vision is taking in what the rest of the world is doing and being aware of that feedback and processing it and looking for important signals there. And that's kind of, again, what any kind of quest story is about, whether it's the alchemist, the boy who's looking for the treasure in the pyramids. I won't spoil that by saying what happens, but it's a little bit like the Indiana Jones movie. Or Owen, who really, really wants to be the star pitcher of his baseball team, and that isn't exactly how it works out, but the way it works out is a surprise. There's even a surprise in the last 2 pages, the last page of the book. There's a surprise, and then what Owen gets at the end of the book turns out to be the opposite of what he thought he was going to get in the last chapter of the book. I think that it's good to have focal vision and to be clear and focused, but it's also good to stay fuzzy.
Absolutely. The topic that we were talking previously, there is a saying, I think it's actually a biblical saying. It says something about, or something to the effect that you should not eat at a table of angry people. And it's fascinating me because obviously the connotation there is exactly as you described, that information is basically absorbed into the environment and the food in this case, and then you eat it and it's not going to make you feel good.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love it. That's great. There's the more straightforward biblical injunction, don't let the sun set on your anger, is one that I wholly subscribe to. But that one at the table, that's beautiful,
Yes.
Because then there's, you seat me down at the table with my enemies and bring me out. So there's also this idea of, if you are in that circumstance, there is a way to come through with your vibrational integrity intact.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Another one that comes to mind is, I believe it's biblical as well. Another one that comes to mind is, in one of the stories, at least one of the stories, they talk about using a stone as in a rock as a witness to the meeting that they're having. In other words, the information of the meeting is recorded into the stone.
That's interesting you say that. There is a stone, there's a rock in this book. And it's funny because on the cover of the book, you'll see a picture of, if your listeners see a picture of the book at Amazon or online anywhere, whatever, or in the store, on the cover, there's a plate of blueberry pancakes. This is my wife's recipe, by the way. I've been eating it for years. The recipe is in the back of the book. It's delicious. You must try it. It's gluten-free, incidentally. But anyway, there's this plate of blueberry pancakes and a cup of hot coffee. And then there's a single one-stem vase with one peach rose in it. And the scene that it depicts is critical to the book. But before I say what it is, I'm going to say that before we had that picture, I was thinking of putting a picture of a rock, because there's a rock that sets the story in motion, and you don't find out about it until some ways into the story. So I won't spoil where and why and how, but there is a rock that sets the story in motion, and the rock shows up again a number of times as being fairly pivotal in the story. And it only occurred to me after the thing was done and printed that there's there's this line in the Bible that, upon you are Peter. And of course it was a play on words because Petra in Aramaic means rock. So it was a play on Peter's name, but you are the rock upon which I will found my church, because Peter was such a flawed person. So there's, in a way, this whole story unfolds on the basis of this particular rock, which plays this very significant role. I love that you said that. But I should tell the story of the pancakes.
Yes.
So, the pancake scene is something that the boy remembers. This is in chapter 2, so I'm not giving too much away. The boy returns home after a visit to the diner, and he returns home to an empty house. And you get the sense of just how sad his life is, because the house is empty, and he can remember the sounds of it when it was his father and mother and him. And now his mom is at work and his father's gone. He's dead. And it's just the boy at home at the moment. His mom will be home soon. And so by himself, he's getting ready for dinner, and he remembers this scene with his father years ago when he was 8 years old. And he came downstairs one morning, a Saturday morning, and found his father in the kitchen cooking breakfast for his mom. Breakfast in bed, Saturday morning. So his father is cooking his famous oat blueberry pancakes. And so Owen's sitting there, 8-year-old Owen, up on a stool watching his dad cook, and he says, "Dad, what makes your pancakes taste so good? Was it the fresh blueberries?" This is in New England, and fresh blueberries in New England are amazing. And his father says, "No, they're good, but that's not it." So, is it the oats, the oat flour, fresh ground oat flour? No, it's not it. Is it the maple syrup? No. Is it the honey? No. No. And finally his dad gets down at his level and says, "Owen, the secret ingredient isn't anything in the pancakes. The secret ingredient is who you're making the pancakes for." And that, for me, is like the core message of the book. That is the X factor kind of at the heart that's why at the end of the book, the seventh rule of the 7 rules says that greatness is not the same thing as excellence. Excellence was rule number 6, but this is rule number 7. Greatness, he says, is excellence plus honor. Which is to say, excellence is doing something really well. Excellence is being highly skilled. And I have an extremely high regard for excellence. It's one thing that my sniper friend and I really connected on, and nobody is more a fan of excellence than a Navy SEAL sniper. So I love excellence. Excellence is awesome. But you can be, an excellent evil person. you can be an excellent, international arms dealer, an excellent drug dealer. You can be an excellent, whatever. So excellence plus honor means you're highly skilled at what you do, but also at all moments acutely aware of why you're doing it and who you're doing it for.
Truly, truly adds the life of the experience and the reality to it. It gives it life, doesn't it?
It's the dimension of it, yeah. It's the thing that my friend Spencer's author friend was missing. He no doubt did an excellent job with that book. But where was the honor? Who was he making the pancakes for? He didn't know. It's like a deadline. Publisher. No damn pancakes. So there was no special ingredient, no secret ingredient. Didn't matter how many blueberries were in that thing.
Absolutely. I absolutely understand why Rebecca Jernigan wanted you to come on the show so badly, because Rebecca just absolutely loves cooking, baking, and doing many, many things. And she is she's a very well-known person when it comes to psychic and intuition and things like this. And I absolutely, I'm sorry that Rebecca couldn't be here to interview you, but I'm sure there will be other times. Just a beautiful story, John. Just love it.
Have I mentioned how much food there is in this book? There's a lot of food in this book. I just want to say that there's a lot of food in this book, and 14 recipes in back, by the way.
Well, that's nice. That's I can't wait to read this book. I said to someone the other day, they actually asked me, "Okay, Tobias, I know you're a very busy guy and you do this and you do that. What do you do on weekends?" I said, "Well, you're right. I am very, very busy. I am very, very busy. But weekends, I really just like to relax and eat a lot of food."
All right, my man. Yes. Excellent.
And I'll work out.
So my wife and I love to cook, and we love to eat. And I've gone cooking with Chef Charles a few times. He's in Houston. I'm going out this coming weekend to do a book signing with him, actually. And we spent a few days in Houston shooting some video of him cooking and discussing some of the recipes in the book, and the two of us talking about it. And I love cooking with him because you expect him to be. This guy has won more Olympic gold medals for his cooking, and there is a culinary Olympics, and he's a gold medalist.
Wow.
But it's not the razzle-dazzle, fancy knife technique and all that stuff that impresses you, although he has all that. It's when he's there in the kitchen cooking, he's like a kid in a sandbox. He's just so in love with this stuff. You see him cooking a little sauce, and he can't help himself. He starts going, oh my God. It's like, oh, this is so good. And you'll just see he's just in love with it. It's just so much fun. So yeah, we love the food. There is food in this book, and it's all the real thing.
It's so nice because, I had these inclinations before the show tonight that I'd like to talk about, sort of things that are magical and here and there, and sort of the mystical, unseen things. And this is exactly what we've done. This is exactly what we're doing, because it is these unseen things, these emotions, these feelings, these thoughts that are kept within the mind they're going into the reality and affecting it. And your story there, even right there with Chef Charles, is a wonderful thing, because it really illustrates that we have to be, if the more we're aware of how we're affecting our reality, the more we can make it into a better one, and certainly a successful one.
Yeah. Yes. Chef tells Owen at one point, one of his rules, I think it's rule number 2, is improve every dish you touch. And it's funny because I got that from Chef Charles's kitchen. He's got 75 employees. They have 5 kitchens, 3 restaurants, and they produce 80 to 100 banquet events a week. I mean,
wow.
It's this gigantic food machine. But when you visit it, it's more like a dojo than a commercial kitchen. It's this beautiful place, all these kids running around, and he's there like he wants to raise all of them to live lives of magnificence. And over the door of this one kitchen, the sign says, improve every dish you touch. And as the chef teaches that to Owen in the book, in course it becomes, improve with everything you do. Ask yourself, am I making the world a better place?
Yes. Yes.
And with every thought you think, am I making myself a better person? And if not, why think that thought? Why not choose a different thought?
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. It's these ingredients of care for yourself, care for what you do, love for the world, and love for good things that really make the difference. We talk about, I teach a course called Practical Modern Magic, as I alluded to earlier, and and the way I view it, all of these things within life, the beautiful stories that you're sharing with us tonight, the view I have of magic is simply that these are things that are unseen. They're not supernatural to me, but in most cases they are simply sciences that are misunderstood. And what you've brought into and breathed into our conversation tonight is some really deep, sweet understanding of those levels that so many of us don't even have time in this hectic world and our lives to contemplate. So it's really, really nice to sit back and just listen to these stories tonight. I really appreciate this.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It's a absolute pleasure. It's a joy to kind of wander through these halls of this kind of thinking, because it's, what a great life we have. We get to sit down and talk about this kind of stuff, for a couple of hours. It's great.
Yeah.
Because it's also vital.
I say that a lot. I say, and I'm careful sometimes who I say this to, but I honestly say to a lot of times, I love my life, because so many people don't. But I am so lucky what I do. I can talk with the most incredible people around the world. That's just on Rebecca's radio show. I can, my practices in my life, I love the things I do. I have passion. The things that you've done and continue to do clearly are full of passion. What's next on your horizons? You're writing more, aren't you?
Yes. Yes, I am. You bet.
What types of subjects are you? I would love to.
Want to hear what's around the corner? All right. Here's what's coming. So here's the coming attractions. Well, there's the Go-Giver has spawned a series. There have been a few more stories in the Go-Giver series. The Go-Giver Leader is the next one, And it's a whole different story, and a lot of pieces of my life in that. And my friend Bob and I have a new Go-Giver book coming out next spring called The Go-Giver Influencer, and it's a whole new story. And there, in addition to the humans, there is a large dog named Solomon and a Russian blue cat named Cleopatra in that story. So that's coming up. And there are probably a few more Go-Giver books in somewhere in the works after that. I'm working on a book with Brandon, as I said, called Mastering Fear, which will be out next year. At least it will be if I write it. I better do that. I'm working on a few other parables with a few other authors whose names I can't divulge yet, but that's coming up soon. And
Nice.
if the recipe, if it generates enough of an interest and of a buzz, and if enough people love it and buy it and read it and talk about it, Chef Charles and I have an idea for a sequel, for another story in the Owen Chronicles that we would love to write there too. So it's there's no shortage of stories and experiences to write about.
I'm really looking forward to these. I'm looking forward to the ones you've already written, and me spending some time with those books. It's fantastic. Yeah, really fantastic. It's interesting the Go-Giver. I was thinking about this earlier, the Go-Giver and then the Go-Giver leader. I can see there's different avenues there. I sort of, while knowing nothing except the titles and the descriptions about the books, I wondered if it was, if they talk between the two about sort of the delicate balance between winning on a business level while maintaining integrity on a personal level. Is that what they sort of talk about?
What they really talk about is that the fundamental principle at the heart of the Go-Giver is this idea that when you take the focus off of yourself and put it on others, that is, when you operate with an idea with the spirit of generosity and an idea of putting others' interests first, not demeaning your own, but putting their interests first, that this is ends up being not only a noble and altruistic and generous and nice, all those nice words, a nice way to be in the world, but it's also pragmatically effective. That is, when you take care of other people, when you look out for other people, you will be more than handled. And that in fact, the most successful people in business are people who are go-givers, not just go-getters. And being a go-getter is a great thing. Go-getters are people who have passion and go get things done. That's fantastic. But a go-giver is someone who is passionate, goes and gets things done, but always has an idea of how can I add value to others' lives, to the rest of the world? How can I add value as opposed to how can I get value? The go-giver leader just kind of applies that idea in the leadership space. And the influencer, which isn't out yet, we've written it. I know it's real because I've read it. And I wrote it, is fundamentally about disagreements and negotiation and the capacity to see the other person's point of view, which we felt might be a useful thing in this world around now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No doubt about that. Yeah. Care is the sort of the magical ingredient, as you're saying, to the mixture. It's like the magical ingredient. It really makes a difference.
Yeah. And it's that there's not a contradiction between adding value to others, serving others, and also being served ourselves. It isn't like I'm either a nice guy and who helps others or a selfish guy who gets ahead. No, I'm a nice person who helps others and gets ahead. It doesn't have to be either or. It is both and.
Well, yeah, it's a two-way street. So when there's that balance, then that's what progress is. That's what good things are made out of, isn't it?
Yeah. And when you look out for just yourself, you end up being miserable. So, you end up losing.
Isn't it interesting that the endless, countless schools of thought and teachings over the ages that talk about balance, and yet it's so difficult for so many people, maybe all of us at times, to sort of strike that balance, to find it. And yet you've done such an incredible job.
My favorite expression of that is Martin Luther, who said that humanity is like a drunkard who, having fallen off his horse, clambers back up onto the saddle and falls off on the other side.
It's perfect, yeah.
Stumbling between extremes.
Absolutely. It's kind of the story of my life.
We're not alone in it.
John, where can people find you and your books?
My name, JohnDavidMann.com.
John, if these walls could speak, they would tell me I have enjoyed this 2 hours immensely. I really hope to speak with you again. Thank you very, very much for being my guest.
Anything. Pleasure is mine.
Thank you, John. Good night. See everybody next week.